Christmas morning. Snow dusted the sidewalks like powdered sugar on burnt toast. I sat in my car engine idling, watching the front door of my mother's house like it might sprout fangs. It wasn't that I was late, I was stalling. You'd think by 26, I'd have figured out how to brace for disappointment. But family has a way of slipping past your defenses like cold wind through a cracked window. I took one last breath of clean, silent air and stepped out into the slush. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and tension. My mother's voice floated in from the living room. Well, look who finally showed up. Her name's Teresa, but she prefers... Mom barked like a command. She was perched on the couch next to my sister Clarissa, who was admiring a handbag that could have paid someone's rent. "Isn't it gorgeous?" Clarissa gushed, twirling the bag's gold hardware. She was 24, camera-ready, even in her pajamas. My brother Jake sprawled across the recliner with a gaming controller in hand. Barely glanced up. "Took you long enough." "Danny?" "That's me, Danny, short for Danielle." The family footnote. I hung my coat by the door and forced a smile. The room looked the same fireplace decked in cheap garland stockings with our names stitched in fading thread, but it felt like a stage and I was walking into the final act of someone else's play. "Don't just stand there," Mom called, waving her wine glass. "We saved the best for last." Jake snorted, already smirking. Clarissa pretended to be gracious and set her purse down gently on the couch like it was made of crystal. Mom reached behind a stack of neatly wrapped boxes and pulled out a crushed little bag. She held it out between two fingers like it might stain her. "This one's for you," she said. I took it. No ribbon, no name tag. Just a sad, sagging sack that reeked of whatever lived in the back of the hall closet. Inside was a candle. Used. The wick was burnt down and lopsided. The label had peeled halfway off, but I could still make out the word vanilla. Mom chuckled. "Well, that's about your speed, right? Maybe you can sell it for lunch money." Jake tossed a crumpled napkin at me. "Or light it when you finally move out of that shoebox apartment." Clarissa snorted into her cocoa. I stared at the candle for a second. My hands didn't shake, I didn't cry, I just felt this hollowness stretch out inside me, like someone opened a trapdoor in my chest and the wind rushed in. Then I stood up, gently set the candle on the table, and walked out. Nobody said a word, not Mom, not Jake, not Clarissa. I stepped into the freezing air, not even bothering to grab my coat. I made it halfway down the street before I heard the familiar squeal of tires and saw a red SUV pull alongside me. Danny. It was Aunt Joy. Late 50s red lipstick. No patience for bullshit. She rolled down the window and peered out. "What happened?" I shook my head. My voice was lodged somewhere behind my ribs. Joy's face darkened. She parked, stepped out, and without hesitation wrapped her coat around my shoulders. "Come on." I didn't argue. Just let her steer me back toward the house like a broken wind-up toy. When we walked in, the front door was still ajar. Freezing gusts whipped through the entryway unnoticed by anyone inside. Clarissa was FaceTiming someone showing off her new bag. Jake had started a new game. Mom was pouring another glass of wine, humming to herself. Joy looked around like she'd walked into a war crime. Someone want to explain why my niece was walking down the street in the snow without a coat? Mom blinked, clearly annoyed. "Oh God, Joy, it was a joke." That Joy pointed at the candle still sitting on the coffee table is not a joke. That is cruelty wrapped in garbage. Clarissa rolled her eyes. She's always so dramatic. Joy's voice dropped to something dangerous. "You think this is funny? You think treating her like garbage is some kind of holiday tradition?" Jake muttered something I didn't catch. Mom stood up, crossing her arms. "This is none of your business, Joy." "Oh, it is now," Joy snapped, "because I'm the only one in this damn house acting like family." I edged backward toward the door. My heart was beating like a drum in a tight, echoing hallway. I didn't know if I wanted to run or stay. Maybe both. "You've been punishing her for years," Joy said, voice shaking now. "Because she reminds you of him, of the man who left, because she didn't play your golden child game." Mom's face cracked then. Not guilt. No. Teresa was too proud for guilt, but fear. Fear that the script was slipping. Joy turned to me quieter now. "You don't owe them a damn thing." She took my hand and led me out. Again, no one stopped us. We sat in her SUV for a long time, engine running, heat humming. "You don't have to go back," Joy said finally. "I don't know where else to go," I whispered. "You come home with me," she said, "as long as you need." And just like that, the part of me that had held everything in duct-taped hope and all finally unraveled. Tears came fast. hot ugly, but I felt seen. And that was a start. Joy's house was tucked behind a cluster of pines on a quiet street about 20 minutes from the place I had just walked out of. It wasn't fancy, just a modest one-story ranch with chipped paint, an old porch swing, and a welcome-ish sign crooked on the door. But it felt like stepping into another planet. The warmth hit me first. Not just the heat from inside, but the kind that lives in soft lighting and cluttered bookshelves, and the smell of something always baking Joy had decorated with care, not for show. Little things stood out. A worn quilt draped over the back of the couch, pictures of her garden in full bloom taped to the fridge, a snowman mug with my name written in Sharpie on a piece of tape. Her dogs, Max and Dolly, came barreling in like I was long-lost royalty. Max barked once, then flopped at my feet. Dolly leaned her head into my knees like she knew I needed something solid to hold on to. Joy didn't hover. She just pointed down the hallway. Guest room's yours for however long. Clean towels on the bed, and I made vegetable soup earlier if you're up for it. I nodded, too tired to speak. I hadn't even realized how tight my body had been until I sat down. Everything inside me just slumped. The guest room had blue walls and a small window facing the backyard. A simple bed, a reading lamp, a stack of books on the nightstand that looked well-loved. There was no candle on the dresser, but even if there had been, it would have been new. Whole unlit. I changed into the sweats Joy laid out and padded into the kitchen. She didn't ask questions. Just poured soup into 2 bowls, set out crackers, and nudged the salt toward me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I ate without a knot in my stomach. Later, we curled up on the couch under a fleece blanket, mugs of tea in hand. A quiet version of Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas played on the radio. Joy glanced over. You want to talk about it? I shook my head. Okay. Just that no prying, no guilt. The silence between us was safe. Not the kind of silence you fill with apologies and fake laughs, the kind you can sit in and not drown. After a while, she spoke again, soft this time. Your mom, she used to be softer, you know. Before your dad left. I stared at the steam rising from my mug. She loved hard, but when he walked out, she folded in on herself, and instead of healing, she sharpened on you. It wasn't news. But hearing someone say it out loud made it real in a different way. I didn't respond. Didn't need to. We watched the snow fall through the living room window. Max snored. The heater clicked and hissed. And for the first time that day, I felt warm all the way through. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the floor in lazy gold. I sat at the kitchen table, cradling a second cup of coffee, watching Joy buzz around the kitchen in slippers and a messy bun. I was thinking, she said, sliding a plate of eggs toward me. Maybe we go into town later. Hit that little secondhand bookstore you used to love. My voice was rusty from disuse. I thought it closed. New owner reopened last month. They've got a cat now named Edgar. I couldn't help it. I smiled. She grinned like she'd won something. There she is. We spent the afternoon thumbing through dusty paperbacks while Edgar the bookstore cat tried to climb into my purse. I picked up a collection of essays, half because I remembered liking the author, half because I wanted to feel like myself again. Or at least someone I used to be. Back at Joy's, we made hot cocoa and watched cheesy made-for-TV Christmas movies that felt like parodies of the life I'd always wanted. Joy made sarcastic commentary during the kiss scenes. I laughed more than I had in months. It didn't feel like home yet, but it felt like a place I might one day miss. Later that night, after Joy had gone to bed, I stayed up flipping through the essays I bought. One line stopped me cold. Sometimes the hardest part of healing is giving yourself permission to stop bleeding. I read it again and again. My phone buzzed on the table. Mom, are you done being dramatic? Clarissa, you're seriously blowing this up for no reason. Jake, grow up. It was just a candle. I didn't reply, just turned the phone face down. Not even a sorry. Not a single "are you okay?" I felt something tighten and release in my chest at the same time. A strange combination of grief and relief. The worst part wasn't that they didn't care. It's that I'd spent so long hoping they would. The days blurred together. After that, I helped Joy shovel snow, walked the dogs through the neighborhood, and started a notebook of things I wanted to try again. Nothing dramatic, just little sparks I thought I'd lost, like writing, or painting, or waking up and not dreading the day. Joy never made it weird, never acted like she was saving me. She just kept showing up. Quiet and steady, like the way snow covers a broken sidewalk and makes it look soft again. One night, while we were playing cards at the kitchen table, she looked at me across her hand and said, "You know you don't have to go back, right?" I nodded. "Yeah, I think I'm starting to believe that." And it was true. Because healing. It doesn't always look like breakthroughs and breakdowns. Sometimes it looks like sipping lukewarm tea across from someone who reminds you you're worth more than a burnout candle. It's funny how fast you can settle into quiet. Not silence. There was always some sound in Joy's house, the shuffle of her slippers, Dolly barking at the mailman like it was a personal insult, the kettle squealing like it had something urgent to say. But it was the kind of noise that made you feel less alone, like the house was breathing with you. By the end of the first week, I wasn't jumping at every notification. I turned my phone to silent and left it in a drawer. My thoughts stopped spinning long enough for me to recognize my own voice when it spoke. It was quiet in there, but it wasn't empty. I spent the first few days doing small things, washing dishes, folding laundry, sitting outside on the back step with a blanket and hot tea, watching the wind drag snow across the yard. I wasn't trying to prove anything, I just needed to feel useful. Grounded. Joy didn't hover, but she noticed. "You always used to be this way," she said one morning as I set fresh sheets on the guest bed, holding everything together. "And nobody ever asked how much of yourself you were pouring out just to keep them afloat?" I didn't know what to say, so I shrugged. She didn't push, just handed me a warm cinnamon roll and said, "Here, something for your soul." On the 7th day, I got an email, a newsletter from the local community center of all things. I must have subscribed years ago when I lived nearby, back when I thought joining things would fix how lonely I felt. There was a flyer attached. A writing group, low pressure free, held Thursday nights at the library meeting room. I clicked away from it, then clicked back. Then I stared at the screen for a long time, chewing the corner of my lip. "I think I might go," I told Joy that night, to this writing thing. She didn't even blink. "Good, I think you should?" That was all. No fanfare. No wide-eyed surprise that I might want something again. Just quiet confidence that of course I did. Thursday came. I dressed slowly, second-guessed everything from my sweater to my handwriting. It had been years since I wrote anything that wasn't an apology or an invoice. When I walked into the library meeting room, there were 6 other people. All ages. All a little awkward. The group leader was a woman in her 60s with gray streaks in her braid and paint on her sweatshirt. She introduced herself as Mara and told us to call her that or nothing at all. She didn't care. "Rule number 1, she said, setting out a tray of cookies. No judgment. Rule number 2, we write anyway, even if it's garbage, especially if it's garbage." I hadn't realized how badly I needed someone to say that. We did short prompts. Nothing fancy. 5 minutes. Stream of consciousness. No reading aloud. Unless you wanted. I didn't speak much that first night, but I wrote. And when I walked out, I felt cracked open in a good way, like something dormant had stretched for the first time in a while. The next day, I opened my old notebook. I hadn't touched it in months, maybe years. The last page had a single sentence. "Some stories never get told because the people in them never let you speak." I stared at it for a long time. Then I turned the page and began to write. Not about them. Not yet. Not directly, but about snow. About silence, about what it feels like to want out and not know where the door is. Joy passed by the guest room and paused. "You're writing," she said gently. I nodded, unsure whether it was pride or fear fluttering in my chest. She smiled. "Good." Then she disappeared down the hall. A few nights later, we were watching old sitcom reruns, and Joy suddenly said, "You know, I think people forget how hard it is to grow up in a house where love feels like a contest." I blinked. She wasn't looking at me when she said it, just staring at the screen like she was remembering something far away. "I see it," now she added, "how your mom put you all in a cage and made you fight for scraps. And you never even tried to win. You just kept hoping the rules would change." That was the first time I cried in front of her. Not loud sobs. Just the kind of crying that comes without warning. Silent, sudden. Like a glass tipping over after sitting too close to the edge. She didn't try to fix it. She just reached over, squeezed my hand, and let me cry. The texts had stopped by then. Or maybe they hadn't. I wouldn't know. I hadn't checked in days. One night, I picked up the phone just to see 37 unread messages. Mostly from Mom, 3 from Jake, 2 from Clarissa. All different variations of the same tired script. "You're overreacting. We were joking. You never could take a joke. Why do you always make everything about you? Not one sorry. Not one acknowledgement. Just guilt dressed up like concern." I locked the screen, set it down, and for the first time I didn't feel obligated to explain myself. The next week, Mara gave us a new writing prompt. Write about a place where you were invisible and what would have changed if someone had looked at you. I stared at the page. Images flickered through my mind like a slideshow. My 13th birthday, where Clarissa got the cake she'd begged for and I got a card with my name spelled wrong. The school play they didn't come to. The time Jake crashed my graduation dinner because he got a promotion at work. I wrote about a house full of voices where mine never echoed back. And I wrote about a woman with quiet hands and warm soup who looked at me and saw someone worth feeding. When we went around the table to read aloud, I hesitated. Then I spoke. My voice shook. But no one laughed. No one interrupted. They just listened. And afterwards, someone said, "I know that house. I think I lived there too." That night, walking out into the crisp air, I felt taller somehow. Not because anything had changed overnight, but because I'd stopped bending. Joy was waiting in the car with the heat running. Dolly's head popped up from the back seat as I opened the door. "You look different," she said as I slid in. "Do I? You're not trying so hard to disappear." I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled. Healing. I'm learning is not a straight line. It's messy. Circular. Some days you feel brand new. Others the ghosts show up wearing your old clothes, whispering old lies. But you get better at telling them to leave. You learn the difference between being alone and being free. You stop begging people to make space for you and start carving your own. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, you find someone who hands you a shovel and says, "I'll help you dig." There's something terrifying about realizing no one's going to rescue you. Not in a bad way, more like clarifying. Like waking up from a dream where you were screaming for help only to realize you had hands the whole time. By the middle of January, the snow outside had started melting into gray slush, and I'd stopped waiting for my mother's apology to show up in my inbox. I knew it wasn't coming. Joy walked into the kitchen one morning with a stack of flyers tucked under her arm. She slid them onto the table like a deck of cards. "Got these from the library," she said, pouring herself a mug of tea. "Thought they might spark something." Writing workshops. Community events. Freelance job boards. A flyer for a local food co-op looking for part-time help. I looked up at her confused. She just shrugged. "You don't have to stay stuck." It wasn't pushy. It wasn't even a nudge. It was just a door left open in case I wanted to walk through it. So I did. I emailed the editor of a small blog that paid writers for lifestyle articles. Stuff like how to organize a studio apartment or 5 ways to meal prep on a budget. I didn't think I'd hear back, but 2 days later there was a reply in my inbox. "We'd love to see a sample from you interested." I stared at the screen for a long time before typing yes. That one word felt bigger than it looked. Joy came home that afternoon with an enormous grin. Guess what I found? I raised an eyebrow. "Another bookstore cat." She snorted. "Better a coffee table on clearance." She dragged me to the local furniture outlet like it was Disneyland. The coffee table was nothing special. Light wood, a bit scratched, sturdy. We loaded it into the back of her SUV while Dolly tried to climb into the driver's seat. As we wrestled it through the front door, I said, "You really needed a table that badly." She smiled at me. "No, but you needed a workspace." And just like that, a part of me healed a little. Because sometimes love sounds like I bought a coffee table, so you could write. I spent the next few days hunched over that table, scribbling ideas, editing drafts, pacing between paragraphs. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. When the blog accepted my first article, I almost didn't believe it. $25, it wouldn't pay the bills, but it felt like someone handed me a flag and said, "Here, start planting your own country." I did another, then 2 more. Then I applied for a bigger gig. A local tourism magazine that needed monthly contributors. Joy proofread my application with her glasses halfway down her nose like she'd been preparing for this exact moment for decades. "You sound like you've done this forever," she said. I hadn't, but I was starting to believe I could. Then came the letter. Plain white envelope. No return address. My name in my mother's handwriting. I stared at it for 20 minutes before opening it. Inside was a single card. Blank except for 4 words scribbled in blue ink. This doesn't change anything. No signature. No explanation. Just a quiet little knife slipped under my ribs. Joy found me at the kitchen table that night, staring at it. "Want to talk about it?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, but I want to burn it." She handed me a lighter without hesitation. We stood out back, me in one of her old sweaters and slippers, as the card curled and blackened in the snow-dusted fire pit. Ash floated upward like regrets too light to keep. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because for once I was choosing what to do with the pain. That night, I opened my notebook and started a new piece. Not for the blog, not for anyone else. For me, I wrote about grief that didn't come from death, about the ache of still having a mother, and knowing she's never going to be the person you needed her to be, about how freedom doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it arrives as a coffee table and a part-time writing gig. And halfway through, I realized I wasn't writing to be heard anymore. I was writing because I finally had something to say. A week later, I got a text from Clarissa. Clarissa, saw your article. Cute, you always wanted to be famous, huh? I didn't reply. Clarissa, Mom says you're probably just trying to make us look bad. Still nothing. Clarissa, whatever, you've always been selfish. It used to unravel me being called selfish. It was the family's favorite insult. A catch-all for how dare you stop shrinking for us. Now it just made me tired. I blocked her number. Then Jake's. Then finally Mom's. Not out of spite, out of necessity. There's a difference between cutting people off and protecting your peace. And for the first time in my life, I was choosing the latter. Joy noticed the silence but didn't say anything until I brought it up. I blocked them. I said one night as we folded laundry, I don't want to hear from them anymore. She nodded slowly, folding a towel with quiet precision. You okay? I thought about it. Really thought. Then I nodded. Yeah, I think I am. The freelance work picked up. Nothing glamorous, product descriptions for handmade candles. Go figure, blog posts for a gardening site, editing copy for a dog adoption center. But it was work. My name was on things. My voice was out there. I started waking up before the alarm. Making breakfast, stretching, living. I'd spent so long walking around like a ghost that I'd forgotten what being visible felt like. It was weird, and good, and terrifying, and real. One night, Joy looked up from her crossword puzzle and said, You know, if you ever want to stay for good, I mean. I blinked. She kept her eyes on the paper. It's not charity. You pull your weight. The dogs adore you, and I wouldn't mind a roommate who actually replaces the coffee filters. I laughed, then sat with it. And for the first time, the idea of staying didn't feel like failure. It felt like beginning. By mid-February, the snow started pulling back from the edges of sidewalks like a blanket slipping off a restless sleeper. The air didn't bite as hard, and the sun lingered just a little longer in the sky each day. It felt symbolic, like the world was waking up again. And so was I. I took the food co-op job. 2 mornings a week helping organize the shelves and write the weekly newsletters. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid. More than that, it grounded me. There was something about stocking crates of fresh apples and typing out blurbs about local honey that made me feel connected. Like I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was part of something. Even if it was small, especially because it was small. Joy came home one evening with a thrift store frame tucked under her arm. Look what I found, she said, holding it up like a trophy. It was cheap gold plastic, probably once used for a diploma or a dated wedding photo. But inside it now was a printout of my latest article. You're ridiculous, I told her, half laughing. She just grinned. Nope. I'm your biggest fan. It's official now. She hung it on the wall above the coffee table, my writing table. And I'll be honest, I stared at that thing every single morning before opening my laptop. Not out of vanity, out of proof. One Sunday, we hosted a small brunch. Just Joy's friend Gail from the library, an older couple from her garden club, and a woman named Wren. I'd met at writing group. Wren brought scones and a shy smile. We talked about terrible first drafts and our shared hatred of semicolons. It felt easy. Safe. The kind of conversation that doesn't need armor. After everyone left, Joy handed me a dish towel and said, You realize you're starting to build a life, right? I blinked. Not just hide in one, she clarified. You're building? I smiled, because she was right. The next week, I received an email from my old high school. Subject: Alumni Spotlight nomination. Apparently, someone had submitted my name for a Resilience in the Community award they gave out every few years. The committee wanted to highlight people doing meaningful work in town: writers, volunteers, creators. There was no mention of who nominated me, but I didn't have to guess. Joy's poker face was terrible. I almost didn't go to the ceremony. I didn't want the attention or the weird small-town whispers or the possibility of running into people I hadn't seen since I was the weird quiet girl writing poetry in a cafeteria full of Clarissas. But Joy looked at me and said, You earned this, not to spite them, not for validation, for you. So I went, navy dress, low heels, no armor. The auditorium smelled like floor polish and old paper programs. Folding chairs lined up like obedient soldiers. A cluster of teachers near the front nodded politely as people filtered in. I kept my eyes forward until I saw them. My mother, Clarissa, Jake. 2 rows from the stage, dressed like it was Sunday brunch, wearing expressions that said, "We still run the narrative." I felt the old panic flutter in my chest, hot, bitter, familiar. But then Joy squeezed my hand, and I remembered, they don't get to narrate me anymore. When they called my name, I walked up slow, steady. The MC, a kind woman who once taught my 9th grade English class, read my bio like it was poetry. She mentioned my writing, my work with the co-op, the workshops I'd started hosting at the community center. Danny Walker, she finished, is proof that resilience doesn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it looks like quiet determination, and that's even more powerful. I stood at the podium, took a breath, and spoke. I talked about growth, about second chances, about how some seeds take longer to sprout but they bloom just the same, given warmth, time, and enough space to stretch. I didn't mention names, but I didn't have to. When I looked out at the audience, I saw my mother's jaw tighten. Clarissa shifting uncomfortably, Jake fidgeting like he was back in detention. They heard every word, even the ones I didn't say. Afterward, people came up to shake my hand. Old classmates, former teachers, strangers who recognized my articles from the co-op newsletter. My mom tried to approach, tight smile, eyes sharp. But before she could get within 3 feet, Joy stepped beside me like a well-timed bodyguard. "Come on," she said lightly. "There's cake in the lobby." We walked away. No scene. No drama, just a clean exit. And honestly, that was the revenge. Later that night, curled up on Joy's couch with the dogs at our feet, she handed me a small box. "Early birthday gift," she said. Like it was nothing. Inside was a simple silver necklace, a tiny charm shaped like a typewriter. "Because you finally found your voice," she said, her eyes glassy but proud. "And I want you to remember that it was always yours." I don't remember what I said back. I just remember hugging her and thinking, this is what real family feels like. And then came the email. From Clarissa. "You really made Mom look bad today. Hope you're happy?" I stared at the screen, then deleted it. I didn't respond. Not out of anger, but because I was finally done performing grief for people who refused to see the damage they caused. The next day, I wore the necklace, sat at the coffee table, opened my laptop, and typed. They tried to make me the footnote in my own story, so I turned the page. I didn't stop writing for hours, because I wasn't scared of the blank page anymore. It belonged to me now. Spring came in like a shy apology. It didn't arrive with bright blooms or cinematic sunshine, just softer winds, thinner jackets, and the sound of melting snow trickling through the gutters like nature exhaling. I hadn't planned to stay with Joy this long, but here I was 5 months in, still waking up in the blue guest room with the quilted blanket and bookshelf full of mysteries. And for the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel behind. I felt home. The co-op offered me more hours, a staff writing position plus helping plan their seasonal campaigns. It was small town stuff, flyers for strawberry picking events and newsletters with pancake recipes, but it gave me a rhythm. And for someone who spent years bracing for the next insult routine was a kind of healing. Joy framed another article. We laughed about it, but she hung it right under the first one, the wall of wins, she called it. One night, as we folded laundry, she asked, "Have you thought about getting your own place again?" I hesitated. "Not because I want you gone," she added quickly. "Just in case you're thinking about the next chapter." I looked around her cozy kitchen. The dented kettle, the dog toys, the fridge magnets shaped like fruit. And I realized something. "I think I already started the next chapter," I said. A few weeks later, I found a small rental above a plant shop in town. 1-bedroom sloped ceiling, creaky floorboards, and a window that overlooked the street. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Joy helped me move in with zero fuss. Max and Dolly came too, just to sniff around and make sure it passed the vibe check. It did. Before she left, she handed me a tin labeled "Emergency Cinnamon Rolls" and kissed my forehead. "You know where I am," she said. I knew. I filled the place with little things I chose just for me. Thrifted curtains, a second-hand desk, a soft chair by the window with a yellow throw blanket that felt like sunlight. No hand-me-downs from people who gave me bruises with their love. Only things that made me feel real. My phone buzzed again a few days after I settled in. A different number. This time unknown. I let it go to voicemail. Then curiosity got the better of me. It was my mother's voice, tight controlled. "Danny, I heard about the award. That was well. Anyway, I think it's time we talk. You can't just keep shutting us out. Family doesn't disappear." I listened to the message 3 times, and then deleted it. Because here's the thing. Family disappears all the time. Sometimes quietly. Sometimes while they're still in the room. Joy called that night. Did you hear from her? Yeah. You okay? I looked around. My apartment, the twinkle lights, the half-written draft on my laptop, the piece humming in the silence. Yeah, I said I really am. At the next writing group meeting, I read something personal. Not masked with metaphors or cloaked in fiction. Just the truth. I wrote about a girl who was always asked to smile while swallowing her pain, who finally realized she could spit it out, wipe her mouth and walk away. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then someone said, "You're not her anymore, are you?" I smiled. No, I'm not. It didn't mean I never got sad. There were days where something dumb as scent, a phrase, a song would punch the air out of me, but I let it pass. I stopped begging sadness to leave early just to make room for others' comfort. Some nights, I still imagined what it might feel like to get an apology that meant something, to hear you were right to leave, but I didn't need it to move forward. Closure isn't a letter or a hug or a tearful reunion in the rain. Sometimes it's just choosing not to check your voicemail anymore. By summer, I was writing full-time. A mix of freelance articles, co-op work, and a personal essay series that someone at a small indie press had taken an interest in. They called the series Things I Carried Until I Didn't. Fitting. Joy came to the open mic night where I read the first excerpt. She sat front row in a red cardigan, beaming like a stage mom and mouthing the words along with me. Afterward, she hugged me tighter than usual and whispered, "Your mother never deserved to hold you this way." And I finally let myself believe it. Clarissa sent me one last email. Weeks later. Subject line, "So you're just never coming back." The body of the message was short. "You're still part of this family whether you like it or not, but whatever. Keep pretending you're above us. You'll come crawling back eventually." I didn't reply. I didn't cry. I didn't rage or draft a perfect monologue in my head. I just closed my laptop. Because the best revenge isn't ruining their lives. It's refusing to let them ruin yours. My apartment smelled like basil and laundry detergent. There was a print of sunflowers above my desk. My framed articles lined the shelves. My typewriter charm necklace hung on the wall beside a note Joy had scribbled on a napkin one night. The past is not your blueprint. Tear it up. I made tea, put on music, and I wrote, "Not to be understood, not to be loved." But because I had finally remembered how to listen to my own voice and she was loud in the best possible way, I don't know if my mother ever realized what she lost, or if she even believes she lost anything at all, but I do know this. The version of me who stayed quiet, who begged to be noticed, who swallowed every insult like communion. She's gone. And in her place, me. Still here, still whole, still writing story 2. Since my cousin was more deserving of the attention, my parents did not come to pick me up at my own graduation. My mother muttered, "Because you're not like the rest of us?" In response to my question. They left my gown and hat outside with me. They pleaded with me to come home the next morning. Your uncle is upset with us." Mom? I simply don't understand. Why didn't you at least follow? I had to stand there alone. But why? My heart sank during the brief silence on the other end of the telephone before she muttered back, "Since you are different from the rest of us." I had to take the phone out of my ear and look at it as though I could have misheard. But I had not. Before I could utter another word, she hung up. One of my life's goals has always been to graduate. I didn't cause issues. I was also not an exceptional student, not like my cousin Gia was anyhow. I just focused on my studies and kept my head down, survived adolescence's chaos without making a splash. That must have been my worst transgression. The family asked me to perform for them, but I didn't. I was not gleaming Des Moines. Iowa is where I grew up. Although it's neither a large metropolis nor a tiny town, it has a certain vibrancy where people are quite concerned about their lawns, church attendance, and what their neighbors may think. Carl and Lorraine, my parents, were the type of people who assessed their success by the pictures on the mantle, post-Christmas grins, and report cards on the refrigerator. You know, it has to look good. J.A. Our extended family's golden kid was my mom's side cousin. National piano contests, swimming medals for the entire state, and local press stories. She was headed to an Ivy League university. She wasn't even my parents, but she was all they could have hoped for in a child. My mother used to say, "We just love how grounded Jaya is or how poised she is." I could repeat it with her intonation since I had heard it enough. I suppose it didn't matter that I got accepted to the University of Chicago on a full academic scholarship, which wasn't elegant or attractive enough. The day of my graduation coincided with a jazz piano concert. It was only a regional showcase in Cedar Rapids. There were no nationals or anything. My parents agreed to attend my ceremony even if it meant leaving early when I notified them weeks in advance, even if they were forced to part ways. We'll be there. We'll be there, of course. My mother smiled politely as she said. She donned a mask-like garment. I ought to have been more aware the gym was full. That year, Roosevelt High had more than 300 seniors, and each one had their relatives cheering from the seats, shouting as their names were announced and displaying homemade placards, balloons, flashbulbs, and tears of joy. It was both gorgeous and hectic. Then there was me. I was sitting there with my honor cords and my black gown, holding on to the little plastic diploma holder they give you before the actual one arrives in the mail. I kept glancing across the throng for my mom's towering body, my dad's bright blue shirt, and their crappy hand-painted Gomorrah sign that said they were creating nothing even after the ceremony was over and the floor was crowded with people. I kept on waiting. I didn't call until almost everyone had gone. What she stated is already known to you since you are different from the rest of us. What on earth does that mean? I simply stood at the side of the parking lot after walking there. The buses have vanished. The instructors had left near the entryway. A few of janitors were picking up confetti. Even though it was only me in a cap and gown clutching my phone like a holy object, it felt almost comical like the conclusion of a movie. I refrained from crying. I believe I was either too shocked or too accustomed to acting as though nothing hurt. I set off on foot. I landed myself to my best buddy from 9th school, Alex's place. The school was around 3 kilometers from her home before I could even knock. Her parents answered the door. I believe they were aware of the issue before I did. Alex gave me a paper plate with some cake that was left over from her younger brother's birthday celebration. Still wearing my gown, I sat on their couch at 8 in solitude. It was absurd. It was all genuine, yet it seemed like a joke or a dream. You may remain as long as you need to, her mother added quietly. I didn't answer at all. I simply nodded. My phone was buzzing constantly when I woke up the next morning. Mom missed 15 calls while Dad missed 8. We get a series of messages. Come home, please. We had no intention of hurting you. Your uncle is upset with us. I sat up for that final one. Dad is Uncle Brian. Jay, he wasn't only angry. He was enraged. All day long, I ignored the calls. My dad attempted to sound cool as if nothing had occurred when he eventually got through. As if we could simply restart. We want to speak. Return home. We'll go over everything. Nothing can be explained. Flatly, I replied. You're not understanding, no. I completely get it. Like you usually do. You chose her? He let out a quick breath without protest. More than anything else could have. However, Uncle Bryn gave me a call later that evening. He didn't spend time making small talk. Mara, I recently learned about it. It's unbelievable I'm repulsed. To be honest, I was silent when someone was genuinely upset on my behalf. I wasn't sure how to react. She didn't want them there at all. Gia believed they were with you, he continued. They weren't, I said. He hesitated. That wasn't fair to you. I am aware. The tears eventually arrived at that point, silent but not crying. Weary. I was crying as if my body had finally given up. I didn't anticipate the impact of my absence. Other family members approached my parents. Uncle Brand reportedly called them out in front of everyone at a family cookout the day after the graduation. He informed them that you put attention above your own daughter. How does it describe you? Naturally, they attempted to twist it. I assured them that attending Jay's gathering was okay, that there was a miscommunication but nobody took it seriously. The only person who truly came to visit me was Gia. A week later, she arrived at Alex's place. As if she had driven directly there, her car was parked in an uncomfortable position on the grass. The once she discovered my whereabouts. She gave me a little framed picture I delivered a lecture at a student leadership conference 2 years ago. I had no idea anyone had snapped a photo. She said, "You looked so confident. I wanted to be like that, so I retained it. Similar to you." I was at a loss for words. We spoke for hours. She expressed her dissatisfaction with being the center of attention to me, how it seemed more like pressure than affection. She expressed regret for the incident. She felt accountable even though she knew it wasn't her fault. I didn't hold her accountable. I didn't. While the majority of my classmates were celebrating getting ready for college or taking family vacations, I chose not to go home that summer. A few blocks away from Alex's house, I took jobs at a secondhand bookshop. Every time she disagreed with someone, the proprietor, Mrs. Stanwyck, a former English teacher, would quote Jane Austen. I didn't offer, and she didn't question why I needed a job. I believe she saw a weight in me that I was unable to conceal but also didn't discuss. My parents made another attempt to get in touch, emails, texts, and even letters in the mail. I didn't reply, but I did read them. Their words sounded more like damage control than regret. Our goal was to provide for the entire family. We were unaware of the extent of your pain. Although it wasn't about picking sides, it was. It was and always has been. Did Gaia's accomplishments eclipse what I was doing at every family meal, picture opportunity, and birthday? I had lost my anger I had just finished. Alex's mother began calling me her summer daughter. She made sure my favorite cereal was available and got me a toothbrush for their upstairs bathroom. You don't have to be thankful, she once stated. You're simply a person. Mara and you should be taken care of. More than anything, my biological parents had ever said that remained with me. In late July, J.A. and I got together once again, this time at Gray's Lake, where we used to go on family picnics as kids. The air was heavy with the smell of lake water and barbecue smoke from neighboring grills, and it was warm and muggy. She delivered a little manila envelope and iced coffees. She sat next to me on the seat by the shore and said, I want to show you something. Copies of ancient family photos. Not the glossy, meticulously staged ones were in the mail. I hardly recalled these sincere ones. One was of me holding a frog I had discovered in the backyard during the summer when I was 11 years old. Gia was giggling next to me. Another was from my science fair in 7th grade. I had placed second after building a simple solar desalination system. Beside my small model setup, I was smiling. The picture does not include my parents. Then I recalled J. A had accepted it. The only family member there was her. According to my mother. I went through her boxes. I felt you should have these after finding them. I touched the edges with my fingertips. The paper seemed more authentic than anything I had at home, despite being somewhat old and wrinkled from prolonged storage. I don't understand. Why did they always treat me like I didn't matter? I eventually said. Gia gazed for a long time at the water. I believe you didn't offer them what they needed to feel since you didn't act the role decent parents. You made it difficult for them to act as though nothing was wrong. That was not how I had previously thought about it. However, she was correct. They required a mirror. I was a window. When August finally arrived, my father sent one more email. Compared to the others, it was lengthier. Wordy as if he was trying to seem deep. A phrase that said, "We know we've hurt you," was included. We failed despite our best efforts to please everyone. It was the closest they had ever come to acknowledging error. But it wasn't truly an apology. I didn't respond, though. 2 weeks before to my departure to Chicago, I packed my belongings. I didn't seek assistance. I didn't invite anybody to say goodbye. I invited Alex to accompany me when I hired a U-Haul. Somewhere on 88, just outside of Iowa City, she played DJ, blaring old high school tunes that we used to sing in her bedroom when we were meant to be studying. "Are you sure you're comfortable doing this alone?" she said. I peered out the window. Unending, familiar, and already vanishing into the past. The fields rolled by. I don't know what I said, but I believe the moment has come. For the first time in years, college seemed like a breath of fresh air. I kept the events of the summer a secret from everyone there. Not immediately, I simply let myself to exist. I used those antique pictures and used posters to adorn my door. J.A. provided for me. I was given a part-time job in the university library shelving books. I went everywhere on foot. In that calm, cautious manner, I gradually gained acquaintances. Those who have been burnt often do. I didn't start writing about it until a few months later. As an elective, I participated in a workshop on creative nonfiction. Writing a personal story was our first task. Until 2 in the morning, I sat in the college cafe that evening, erasing and typing. Typing, once again, it lacked polish. There was no sophisticated literary framework to it, it was just honest. After reading it, my lecturer drew me aside. "This," she remarked, tapping her red pen on the printed pages. "This is something." She suggested that I send it to a tiny literary publication in the Midwest. When it was accepted, I did somewhat out of courtesy. I nearly didn't think it was true. However, it appeared in print a few months later. With my name at the top, I sent my folks a copy. The item was neatly wrapped in an envelope with no notice. I received a letter back a week later. The paper was wrinkled as if it had been folded and unfolded a dozen times, and my mother's handwriting was unsteady. I read it. "Mara," I sobbed, "I apologize. I'm at a loss for words. I wish I could have seen you more clearly. I regret that I was oblivious to my own daughter because of our conception of family. I'm available. If you ever want to chat. Mom. Love." After folding the letter, I stored it in a drawer. I didn't feel invisible for the first time in a long time, but I wasn't prepared to answer. I had a genuine sense of documentation, as if they hadn't noticed me. At last the world did. For weeks, I kept the letter hidden from everyone. I didn't know what to do with it. Not because I was trying to hide it. I had discreetly placed it into a box before I left Des Moines, and it seemed like a relic from a different version of my life. I felt sick to my stomach even after reading it again. The remarks were a gentle scratch of remorse from someone who never anticipated being held responsible. They were neither theatrical nor nasty. That October, Alex came to see me in Chicago. She was visiting schools, but her main goal was to find out where I had ended up. I eventually told her about the letter while we sat by the lake close to college and watched the wind pull leaves from trees. No one asked her to read it. "Are you going to write back?" she said with a simple nod. "I'm not sure. Would you like to?" I stopped, I'm afraid. "But I do it in part. She simply feels bad about it. Furthermore, love is not the same as guilt." Alex was silent for a while. "It isn't, but often the only thing that will ever help them grasp what they've done is guilt." I wasn't prepared for how hard that hit. I had no duty to return home for the first time in my life. As Thanksgiving drew near, there were no goals or ingrained customs that I had to act as though I liked. Some of the residents of my dorm left early. Others hosted potlucks for Friendsgiving. I decided to remain behind and watch old movies by myself while ordering takeout. However, J.A. called Dad and I are traveling to Evanston to visit some relatives. Perhaps we might stop by, I thought. "Only us, there is no pressure." I paused. She waited. "Yes. Finally," I said. "All right." The following day they arrived. J.A. with a pie that was baked from scratch. She was adamant. She held a bag of goods while baking herself and Uncle Bren. As he entered, he stated, "You need real food. College students thrive on caffeine and fumes." For the first time in weeks, I grinned. In the little dorm kitchen, we prepared meals together. Everything was in disarray. The hallway alarm was triggered by the lack of counter space, borrowed pans, and oven smoke. Yet it seemed cozy and natural, simply said. Easy. In my dorm room, we ate on the floor, in my beanbag chair curled up. Uncle Brant was sitting cross-legged, and every time he moved, his knees cracked loudly. After a time, he said, "Your piece was amazing," referring to the essay. It had to hurt them, even though I knew it would. I responded that I had no intention of hurting anyone. That's why it landed. "I know." A pause occurred. He said softly, "She's really trying. I mean, your mother. She has become more reserved lately. Contemplative. I believe she's coming to terms with the price of all the minor things she didn't consider important." I remained silent for a while. I believe the price was not insignificant. Chicago winters were harsh. Winds off the lake. Our sharp early night. The walkways were covered in layers of frosted snow. However, I was driving strangely. I felt alive in the cold, as if I were losing the last vestige of my former self. I threw myself into my studies, enrolled in another writing course, and sent more of my work to little magazines. Some dealt with maturing. Others were works of fiction that were somewhat inspired by reality. Moments, conversations, and shards of recollection that refused to go away. Online, a tale about a girl standing by herself outside her graduation got rather viral. Although it wasn't named after me, people assumed that I received messages from random individuals. Some of them were nice, while others were nasty, but the nice ones stayed with me. Numerous individuals said that they could relate to the narrative. One message was particularly clear. My parents also failed to appear. I believed that I was alone. Being able to empathize with another person's suffering is incredibly human. As soon as you give it a name, a portion of its strength is lost. It was several months before I heard from my folks again. Then in February, I received an email from my father. Only one phrase. "Our treatment has begun." I looked at it for a while. It was unexpected. Not because I was overburdened. I didn't anticipate any movement. Slowly, spring came to the city. Through the slush, grass was visible. The wind ceased to sting. Rather of hurrying from lesson to class, students loitered outside buildings engaging in conversation. My phone buzzed as I was making my way back after a late presentation. My mother left a voicemail. I had never heard her voice before. It was raw and gentle. "Hello, sweetheart. I don't anticipate a call from you again. I wanted to let you know that I have been reading your published works. Everyone, I apologize as well. Not in the manner I used to say it, casually and flippantly but I apologize for not seeing you sooner. I apologize for not shielding you from the way we continued to ignore you. I apologize as well. It wasn't until everyone else began telling me that I had let you down that I recognized it. Feeling ignored was not what you deserved. Even if you don't talk to us again, I'll continue to strive for improvement." I kept the voicemail. I didn't respond. I listened to it more than once, but not yet. J. A was there in early May once more. She asked me to join her for supper when she was in town for a music workshop. We took a seat on a rooftop patio with a view of the cityscape. Everything was glowing a gentle gold as the sun began to set. "Are you okay?" she inquired, taking a sip of her drink. I took a moment to respond. "Then really, I believe I'm beginning to be." She grinned. "You've changed from the previous year, lighter. I still get irritated sometimes. I acknowledge you can." What they did and continued to accomplish was not insignificant. That evening, we spent hours discussing old family tales and what it meant to be healed when the individuals who had harmed you were still alive, present, and able to do it again. She informed me that she had changed to that as a result of therapy. She had begun to refuse requests, stopped focusing on what would make her the easiest person to love, and instead asked herself what she wanted. I gave a nod. Isn't that strange? How despite our differences, we were both making a great effort to live in the same house, to stay alive. Gia lifted her glass to outgrow. I clinked mine against hers. I returned to Des Moines for the first time in over a year that summer. There was no plan. I didn't notify my parents I was coming or even make a big show out of it. I was traveling to Kansas City for a writers' conference, and the bus route went directly past my hometown. I made the rash decision to disembark and stay a few nights there to experience it for myself. When I texted Alex's mother to ask whether I could crash, she responded pretty immediately because her family was still living in the same place. "Of course, my dear, you can always count on your bed." As always, the scent of cut grass and pollution filled the air when I stepped off the bus. Nothing had changed in my old neighborhood. The same homes with well-kept lawns, the same broken sidewalks. However, it no longer felt like mine. It reminded me of a location I had lived in a past life. It was only her parents and me because Alex was now away at college. That first night, her dad inquired about Chicago as her mother prepared chicken casserole, as if I were a tourist coming home from a battle. They didn't ask questions, just allowed me room to breathe and exist. I passed the house where I grew up on the second day. I'm not sure what I was anticipating, perhaps a rush of anger or resentment, but for the most part, I felt nothing. The hue of the shutters had changed. I had forgotten how clean the lawn had been. It no longer felt like a place that was mine, only a home. The front door then opened. My mom was the one. When she spotted me, she froze. She had a paper bag and several car keys in her hands, as if she were going to the shop. For a minute, we gazed at one another from a distance. My name wasn't called out by her. She took her time going down the stairs. She simply gave me a look that said she wasn't convinced I was real. Just enough to acknowledge her. I nodded slightly. She didn't say anything, although it seemed like she wanted to. Rather, she sat down, opened the car door, and drove off. I refrained from crying. Nor did I feel victorious. It was simply unreal. That afternoon, I went to Roosevelt High School. It seemed strange and reassuring at the same time that the school secretary still remembered me. If I wanted to, she continued, I could stroll the hallways. It was calm and school was out for the summer. I went by my former locker in the classrooms where I used to stay up late studying for finals. I was trying not to cry in front of the other kids at the gym where I had waited for them while wearing my cap and gown. Parents. I wasn't overwhelmed by the memories, but it did strike me like a wave. I sat down on the bleachers and sat there for a while. After a while, a janitor stopped by and looked at me curiously. I informed him that I was in town. As if he had seen such a thing, he nodded. Many individuals are going back to the locations they formerly made a concerted effort to avoid. I visited my uncle's house before I left town, although I hadn't intended to when When she learned that I was in Des Moines, she pleaded with me to at least have dinner there. If he finds out that you arrived without saying hello, he will be devastated. I said. She said. So I did. The door was opened with his typical rough love. She's there. I assumed I would need to report a missing individual. Dinner was informal and cozy. He prepared fish on a grill, and bring bars of lemon. We took a seat on the terrace outdoors. The air was sluggish and dense with cicadas buzzing in the trees. I didn't bring up my parents after dessert, and they didn't discuss them either. You know, I think sometimes people mess up so slowly that they don't even notice it until the damage is done, my uncle replied, glancing at me across the table. I didn't respond. He had no justifications. He continued by providing some background. However, that does not negate the significance of the injury. Yes, it does. You are quite entitled to bear that burden however you see fit. Beside him, he nodded. We have also been learning that on the bus route to Kansas City, it was the first time I had the impression that someone was prepared to meet me where I was rather than asking me to return to their location. I couldn't stop thinking about that chat on the terrace and how odd and depressing it is that mending frequently starts in locations that aren't even the ones that caused you pain. Sometimes the folks who live on the outskirts are the ones who show you what love could have been. That evening, I resumed writing in the notepad I always had in my luggage. Just recollections, nothing organized. Moments that had been buried beneath my flesh for too long were impressions I wrote about Alex's mom, doing my laundry without saying a word about the quiet that followed my mom's voicemail, and about the tenderness in his voice when she expressed her pride in me. Forgiveness was not the subject of my writing. Not quite yet. I wrote about the gap between suffering and tranquility, but I wasn't convinced I was there. Even if the wound is still hurting, this is the gradual, uncomfortable point at which the bleeding stops. During a student showcase during the conference, I presented one of my writings. It wasn't specifically about my family by name, but more about belonging, being abandoned, and learning to make your own decisions even when they feel like betrayals. A woman in her 40s then approached me. She appeared anxious as if she were trying to contain her emotions. She responded, "My daughter is about your age. It's been a long time since we chatted. I believe I made a few errors." She blinked rapidly and drifted off. I simply nodded as I was at a loss for words. Our stories don't always solve problems. They sit with someone long enough to change their viewpoint, but they don't patch up shattered families or persuade obstinate minds. And sometimes that's all you need to get started. Something had changed in me by the conclusion of that summer. Not in the way of a dramatic film, no abrupt calm, no montage of self-discovery. However, I felt more rooted and confident in my identity without need. The approval of those who had continuously failed to provide it. I stopped forwarding my parents' emails to a different folder once I moved back to Chicago. I haven't blocked them yet, but I haven't replied either. That was a statement unto itself. It is your right to talk. Right now, I just don't have to listen. I put all of my energy into writing. I turned my article into a novel, a compilation of first-person accounts of emotional neglect, family identity, and the odd liberation that comes with letting go. I sent it to a tiny independent publisher with the assistance of a professor. I only wanted the gratification of trying. I had no expectations. Then it was picked up somehow. The editor sobbed when she read the piece describing it as simultaneously calm and scorching. Although it wasn't much, the advance was more than I had ever received. Writing the platform was the true reward. A few book fairs in the Midwest wanted to include me. Yes, I replied. The publisher started a little advertising effort. Literary bloggers interviewed me. A story titled "Telling the Quiet Truth," a young author's journey out of the family that forgot her, appeared in a Chicago local newspaper. That one went around, and as I discovered later, returned to Des Moines. My mother contacted once more about a month before. To the book's publication, I didn't respond. Another voicemail was left by her. Her tone was professional and tight. "Hello, Mara. I noticed that I had read the piece. It was visible to us. I suppose I simply wanted to let you know that we saw it." I didn't return the call, but I did keep the message. Rather, I shared on Instagram a little excerpt from a reading I performed at the Hyde Park Lit Fest. I mentioned sitting outside the gym wearing my cap and gown and constantly checking my phone as if it might summon people in a passage from the text. Sometimes the most significant event in your life is the one they didn't attend. The caption simply stated, "It exploded." It was shared remark associated. At that point, the actual retaliation started. Not the sort that involves altercations or screaming matches, the superior variety. The sort when you get up so softly and fully that those who attempted to shrink. You must accept the truth that they were mistaken. So terribly incorrect. I was invited to return to Des Moines, so I did. A regional author event was being held at the local library school. Reading programs were picking up my book after it made the short list of a Midwest voice. Just underneath a banner that stated, "Featured guest Mara Whitlow." Local author, my face appeared on a poster near the library's entryway. The reading room was already half full when I entered. Some old instructors, old students, and familiar faces. People with copies of my book and sticky notes inside who had hardly recognized me as a child. A representative from the mayor's office even came to introduce me. The woman grinned into the microphone and continued, "I was born and raised right here in Des Moines. The concept that sometimes strength isn't loud is powerfully demonstrated by Mara's work. After years of stillness, sometimes the voice is the one to speak." Reading the first few pages of the chapter, headed, "Alone in the Gym," I took the platform. When I was done, the room was so quiet that I could see someone in the back and hear their bracelet clink against their chair. My folks. My mom is dressed in a dark blue gown, tightly curled hands on her lap. Beside her was my father with the tense, kind look he wore at PTA meetings. They clapped more slowly than the others, hesitant. There was a signing queue following the reading. I autographed books, welcomed people, and posed for pictures. They came over to me after it had finally subsided. I remained silent. It was my mother who spoke first. "You grow into an amazing person," she added quietly. "We have no right to be here." I cocked my head. "You're correct, you don't." She appeared to have been smacked. I raised a hand as my father opened his mouth. I said, "I'm not going to make a scene right now. It has nothing to do with you. You had your opportunities." My mother gave a slow nod. "I get it." "Excellent. Because I wrote that story without your permission," I said. "I'm living it without your presence too?" Before they could answer, I turned and left. Not out of malice, but because vengeance wasn't the most fulfilling kind of retaliation. It was liberty. Living a good life and being seen by those that cared. Gaining indisputable status. The book entered a second printing 3 weeks later. I received an email from a Roosevelt teacher asking if I might visit her class and discuss creative nonfiction. J.A. When she noticed my book on a staff selection shelf at an indie bookstore, she contacted me simply to yell. I continued writing about the strength of walking away and how some houses are constructed of walls and bricks, but others are made of people who show up when it matters. They had to see me become everything they never thought I could be, even if my family may never be what I wanted them to be. That was sufficient. That was more than sufficient.